What if the scariest stories aren't written in books? They're typed out at 2 a.m. by people who still can't sleep. Welcome to Bleak Fears, and if you've ever experienced something on the road that you still can't explain, drop it in the comments below. We read every single one. I was driving alone through Nevada at 2:47 in the morning, and the road ahead was so flat and so dark that my headlights felt like they were cutting through something solid. No other cars. No towns. Just the white dashes on the asphalt disappearing under my hood one after another. Steady and indifferent, like the road was feeding itself into the dark and had been doing so long before I got there and would keep doing so long after I was gone. I'd left Las Vegas about 2 hours earlier. The plan was simple. Drive through the night, reach the Utah border by sunrise, meet my brother in St. George for a camping trip we'd been rescheduling for 3 years. I had coffee in the cup holder, a playlist running low on songs I actually liked, and nothing pressing on my mind. I was tired in that functional way where everything feels slightly muted but you're still present, still making decisions, still capable of reading the road correctly. I wasn't pushing it. I was just driving. The first time I saw him, I almost didn't register it as anything. He was on the right shoulder near mile marker 9. I clocked the number the way you clock something when a part of your brain decides to start keeping records before the rest of you understands why. A man, standing completely still, facing the highway, arms at his sides. No car behind him, no tent or gear, no light of any kind. He was wearing something light. Gray shirt, maybe white, it's hard to know in headlights. And he wasn't waving, wasn't flagging, wasn't doing anything you'd do if you needed help. He was just standing there the way a post stands. Present. Fixed. I passed him in about 3 seconds and he disappeared behind me. I turned the music down and held the wheel a little tighter and ran through the reasonable explanations. Broken down driver who'd walked away from his car. Someone who'd pulled over and stepped out to get some air. A hiker doing something inadvisable at 3 a.m. The desert has a way of making ordinary things look strange, especially when you're tired and the dark is that complete. I had explanations. I stacked them up. I turned the music back on. I drove for 11 more miles, and then I saw him again. Same shoulder, same posture, arms at his sides, facing the road, completely still. I took my foot off the gas without deciding to and coasted down to about 30 as I passed him. He didn't react. Didn't turn toward the headlights, didn't shift his weight or move his hands. Just stood there in the exact same way, not like a person waiting, but like a person who had stopped mid-action and never resumed. Now before you decide what this is, I need you to sit with something for a moment. I had been doing 75 miles an hour. I had covered 11 miles in less than 9 minutes. I had not stopped, not slowed, not taken any exit because there were no exits. I know that stretch of US 93. I'd driven it twice before in daylight, and there is nothing on either side of it. No parallel road. No dirt track running alongside the highway. No structure, no building, no way for a person on foot to cover 11 miles of open desert in the time it took me to drive them. And yet there he was, 11 miles ahead of where I had seen him standing 4 minutes earlier. Same stillness, same light-colored shirt, same arms at his sides. I drove faster. I pushed it to 90 and kept both hands on the wheel and watched every inch of both shoulders and checked my mirrors every few seconds for the next 20 miles. My chest was doing something I didn't have a name for. Not quite panic. More like the feeling of a calculation your body has already completed that your mind hasn't caught up to yet. He didn't appear again. Not at mile 30. Not at mile 40. Not anywhere on that highway for the remaining 2 hours of my drive. He showed up twice, once at mile 9, once at mile 20, and then he was finished. Like whatever the purpose was, 2 appearances were exactly enough. That's the detail I've never been able to work around. If he'd shown up 5 times, 6 times, I'd have committed fully to the explanation that I was more sleep-deprived than I thought and my brain was manufacturing patterns in the dark. But twice is too deliberate for that. Twice with matching details, the posture, the stillness, the arm position, the light shirt, separated by 11 miles I covered in under 9 minutes. That's not a tired mind filling in shapes. That's something I saw. And then it stopped. The camping trip happened. My brother and I hiked for 4 days and cooked bad food over a fire and didn't talk about anything heavy. I didn't bring it up until the last night, sitting outside the tent after dark, and when I described it he listened without interrupting, which isn't like him. When I finished he was quiet for a moment and then he said he wanted to look something up. I told him not to. I did it myself when I got home. 3 evenings going through Nevada County News Archives, accident records, anything connected to that stretch of highway near mile marker 9. I wasn't expecting to find anything useful. I was doing it to close the loop, to be able to say I looked and it was nothing and I could shelve it. I found a 2-paragraph article in a small regional paper. 7 years before my drive, a man had been struck and killed by a hit-and-run driver on that highway, the same general stretch, no lighting, no nearby exits, remote in the specific way that road is remote at night. The article said he had pulled over due to a mechanical problem and was standing outside his vehicle on the shoulder when he was hit. The driver was never found. Standing on the shoulder, arms presumably at his sides. I'm not connecting those two things. I want to be clear about that. I don't have enough to connect them, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. What I'm telling you is that I read that article and I read it again, and then I closed the laptop and sat in my kitchen in the dark for a long time. I still drive that route. For times a year, sometimes more. I take a coworker when I can. When I can't, I leave early enough to hit that stretch in daylight. When that doesn't work out and I find myself on US 93 after midnight, I drive it the same way I always do now. Eyes forward, music off, coffee in the cup holder going cold because I keep forgetting to drink it. Around mile 9, without deciding to, my hands tighten on the wheel. The shoulder is always empty. I stopped finding that reassuring a long time ago. She called me from a gas station payphone at 11:43 at night, and the first thing she said was that she was fine, which is always the thing people say right before they tell you something that proves they aren't. She was driving back from a college visit, alone, which I hadn't been thrilled about, but she was 20 and capable and had driven that route before. The Appalachian stretch through Western Virginia isn't complicated. It's just long and dark, and the cell service disappears for chunks at a time, which is why she was calling from a payphone outside a BP station somewhere past mile marker 34. She said she'd stopped for gas and wanted to check in. I asked if everything was okay, and she said yes, and then paused in that particular way she had when something was sitting in her throat that she hadn't decided whether to release yet. I asked again. She said there was a car that had been behind her for a while. A long while. She described it as a dark sedan, maybe navy, maybe black. She couldn't tell in the dark. No front plates. She'd noticed that when it pulled up behind her at a gas station about 40 miles back, a different station, and she'd thought nothing of it. But it had been behind her since then. 40 miles of 2-lane mountain road. Every turn she took, still there. Hanging back far enough that she couldn't see the driver. Close enough that she could always see the headlights. I told her to stay at the gas station. I told her to go inside, buy something, stay near the register, and call me back in 10 minutes. She called back in 8. She said the car was in the parking lot. It hadn't pulled up to a pump. It hadn't parked near the entrance. It was sitting at the far edge of the lot, engine off, lights off, and she could see it from the window next to the register. Just sitting there in the dark part of the lot where the overhead lighting didn't reach properly. The attendant was a teenager who didn't look up from his phone when she described it to him. She said he shrugged and told her people pulled in to sleep sometimes. I was already in my car by then. She's 3 hours from me on a good night, 2.5 if the roads are clear, and it was close to midnight on a Tuesday, so I pushed it. I told her to stay on the phone with me, and she did. We talked about the college visit for a while to keep things normal. She'd liked the campus, hadn't loved the dorms, the financial aid package was disappointing. I kept one ear on her voice and one eye on the GPS and just drove. She'd been at that station for about 20 minutes when she said the car was gone. Not gone like she'd watched it leave. Gone like she looked up from her phone and the corner of the lot was empty and she hadn't heard an engine. She went outside to check. I told her not to, but she did anyway. She was always like that, and confirmed it wasn't there. No other exits from that lot except the main entrance, and she hadn't seen it pull out. Keep in mind, she'd been watching that corner of the lot almost continuously. She decided to keep driving. I didn't love that, but she argued that sitting at a gas station until 3 a.m. wasn't a better option. And she was right. and she promised to call me the moment she lost the signal so I'd know it was the dead zone and not something else. We stayed on the phone. The road got quieter. She described the landscape as the mountains got heavier around her. The way the tree lines came up close on both sides, the way the road curved and dipped and took away your sight lines every quarter mile. She knew that road. She'd driven it before. But she said it felt different that night, and I didn't ask her to explain what she meant because I already understood. She talked for another 20 minutes, and then mid-sentence the call dropped. I told myself it was the dead zone. I had been telling myself that for the previous 10 minutes, watching my phone, waiting for it. The dead zone on that stretch is real, it's documented. Her phone had dropped there before. I kept driving and told myself that's all it was and watched the clock and calculated that she'd be through it in about 15 minutes and her phone would reconnect and she'd call back and be annoyed that I was still on the road driving toward her. 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. I called her 4 times, straight to voicemail. I called the gas station she'd stopped at. I had the name of it from something she'd mentioned, and the teenager answered and I asked if a young woman had come back in and he said no and hung up. I kept driving. I found her car at 2:16 in the morning, parked on the right shoulder about 6 miles past the dead zone. Hazard lights on. I pulled up behind it and sat in my car for a moment before getting out because I needed that moment and I'm not ashamed of it. Her car was running. The driver's door was closed. Her phone was on the passenger seat. Screen cracked like it had been dropped, showing the call log with my 4 missed calls at the top. She was not in the car. I want to tell you that there's a clean ending here. I want to tell you that she'd gotten out to check a tire and twisted her ankle in the dark and was sitting in the tree line waiting for help, or that she'd flagged down another driver, or that there's some explanation that lives inside the world of things that make sense. She was found by a passing truck driver about 2 miles up the road at 4 a.m., walking along the shoulder, no shoes, no phone, no memory of getting out of the car. She remembered the call dropping. She remembered the dead zone static. She did not remember anything between that moment and the truck driver's headlights. The dark sedan was never identified. There were no other cars on that stretch of road between the dead zone and where I found her vehicle. I drove it twice that night and I know what was there and what wasn't. She doesn't drive that route anymore. Neither do I if I can help it. The thing that stays with me, the thing I keep coming back to in the 3 years since, isn't the car or the empty vehicle or even the 2 miles she walked without shoes in the dark without knowing she was doing it. It's that she called me from the payphone to tell me she was fine, and some part of her already knew she wasn't. We had been on the road for 6 hours when the detour sign appeared, and I remember thinking it was strange because we hadn't heard anything on the radio about construction. No alerts, no delays. Nothing that would explain a detour on a state highway in rural Louisiana at 7 in the evening when the light was just starting to go orange and thick the way it does down there in late summer. My partner was asleep in the passenger seat. We were driving back from a wedding in Baton Rouge, headed northwest toward home, and the route was straightforward enough that I'd stopped paying close attention to the GPS about an hour earlier. The detour arrow was hand-painted, which I noticed but didn't dwell on. Orange board, black arrow, propped against a sawhorse on the right shoulder pointing down a 2-lane road that cut off into the tree line. There was a second sign behind it that said road closed, and that was it. No construction equipment visible. No workers. No cones or lights or any of the infrastructure that normally comes with a legitimate highway detour. But the road ahead did look torn up. I could see that much in the fading light. A stretch of damaged asphalt about 100 yards ahead, uneven and broken at the edges. So I took the turn. The 2-lane road went into the trees and the trees closed up behind us almost immediately, the kind of dense Louisiana coverage that turns 7 in the evening into something closer to 9. My partner shifted in the seat but didn't wake up. The GPS lost the route and started recalculating, which wasn't alarming. Back roads in rural Louisiana drop signal all the time. I drove at about 35 and watched the road and waited for it to reconnect us to the highway. Instead, it connected us to the town. I didn't see a sign for it. One moment there were trees on both sides and then the trees pulled back and there were buildings. A gas station on the left, a diner with its lights on, a row of houses set back from the road behind shallow lawns, a water tower in the middle distance with something written on it I couldn't read from the road. It wasn't a large town. It felt like the kind of place that had stopped growing at some point in the 1970s and simply maintained itself quietly ever since. Everything looked used but not neglected. Cars in driveways, a porch light here and there, a dog sitting at the edge of a lawn watching us pass with the specific calm of an animal that has seen everything it expects to see and found nothing surprising in it. I pulled into the gas station because the tank was at a quarter and because I wanted to ask someone how far we were from the highway. The man at the register was older, maybe late 60s, heavy-set, wearing a short-sleeved shirt with a pen in the breast pocket. He looked up when I came in and nodded the way people nod in small towns when they're being polite without being interested. I asked about the highway and he told me to stay on the main road through town, take the right at the water tower, and I'd hit the on-ramp in about 4 miles. Simple. He said it the way you say directions you've given 1,000 times. I bought 2 bottles of water, a bag of chips, and a coffee for the road. The receipt printed and I folded it and put it in my jacket pocket without looking at it. The man put everything in a paper bag and stamped the bottom of it with one of those ink stamps that some small gas stations use. I'd seen it before at old-fashioned stations, the kind that have been in the same family for decades. Round stamp, ink slightly uneven, the name of the station in a circle around the outside. I thanked him and left. My partner woke up when I got back in the car, groggy and confused about where we were. I told her we'd hit a detour and were passing through a small town and we'd be back on the highway in a few minutes. She looked out the window at the diner, the houses, the water tower catching the last of the daylight, and said it was pretty in a tired, half-asleep way and then closed her eyes again. We found the highway exactly where the man said it would be. Now here is where I need you to pay attention, because everything up to this point is just a story about a detour. 3 days after we got home, I was cleaning out my jacket and found the receipt and the paper bag folded up in the same pocket. I looked at the receipt properly for the first time. The gas station name was printed at the top, a town name below it, a Louisiana parish, a zip code, standard receipt. I put it on the desk and didn't think about it again until the following weekend when my partner mentioned the detour in passing and said something about how she'd never heard of a town in that part of Louisiana that size. I looked up the name from the receipt. Nothing came up. Nothing like sparse results or outdated listings. Nothing like the search returned 0 matches for that town name in that parish in Louisiana. I tried variations of the spelling. I tried just the zip code. The zip code came back as unassigned. I pulled up satellite maps of that stretch of state highway and traced the road we would have taken when we turned off at the detour sign. I followed it into the tree line on the map, the same tree line I remembered the branches closing behind us as we drove in. The road ended about a 1/4 mile in. On the satellite image it just stopped, overgrown at the edges, no continuation, no town, no buildings, no water tower, nothing on the other side of those trees except more trees and then a stretch of low farmland that went on for miles. I still have the receipt. I have the paper bag with the ink stamp on the bottom, the name of the station in uneven ink around the outside of the circle. I have a specific memory of a man in a short-sleeved shirt with a pen in his pocket telling me to take the right at the water tower. I have my partner's memory of looking out the window at a diner and houses and a water tower and saying it was pretty before she went back to sleep. We both remember the town. We remember it the same way, with the same details independently, because I asked her to describe it before I told her what I'd found, and she described the gas station on the left and the dog on the lawn and the water tower, and all of it matched what I remembered without any prompting. I drove that route again 4 months later, in daylight, alone, specifically to find the detour. The stretch of highway where the damaged asphalt had been was smooth and unmarked. No sawhorse, no orange board, no hand-painted arrow. The road that cut off into the tree line was there. I found it, I pulled over and looked at it, but it was gated about 20 feet in with a rusted chain and a no trespassing sign that looked like it had been there for a very long time. The gate didn't look forced. The chain didn't look recently opened or closed. It looked like something that hadn't been touched in years. I took a photograph of the gate. I took a photograph of the receipt next to it, the name of the station visible, the parish, the zip code. I've shown both photographs to 3 different people and gotten 3 different reactions, and none of the reactions made me feel better. I don't have an explanation. I've stopped reaching for one. What I have is a receipt from a gas station in a town that doesn't exist, a paper bag with an ink stamp from a place that isn't on any map, and a very clear memory of a man who gave me directions that were exactly correct for roads that, as far as any record is concerned, were never there. The coffee was good, too. That's the part that gets me when I think about it late at night. Whatever that place was, whoever those people were, they made good coffee, they gave correct directions, and they sent us back to the highway without incident. And I have no idea what to do with that. Whether it's comforting or whether it's the most unsettling part of the whole thing. I think it might be both. I remember the exact song that was playing. That detail has no relevance to anything that happened, and I know that. But it's the thing my brain decided to lock onto and keep, the way trauma picks its anchors randomly and without your input. It was something off a playlist my roommate had made, something with a slow build and a lot of reverb, and it was at the part where the instrumentation drops out and it's just a voice when I came over the rise on I-71 and saw the overpass ahead and saw the figure standing on the railing. I was driving back to Columbus from a weekend in Cincinnati. Sunday evening, still light, maybe 6:40 p.m., traffic was moderate. The kind of drive where you're on autopilot and your mind is already partially at home, already thinking about what you'll eat and whether you remembered to lock the apartment. I was in the center lane doing about 68. The overpass was maybe a quarter mile ahead when I first saw the figure, and my brain did what brains do. It tried to make it make sense before committing to what it actually was. A maintenance worker, someone who'd climbed up there on a dare. A shadow or a structural element that my tired eyes were reading as a human shape. It was a person, standing on the outside of the railing, facing out over the highway, both hands behind them on the bar, leaning very slightly forward. I took my foot off the gas. The car behind me was close enough that slowing down without warning was a risk, and some part of my brain was still managing the driving even as the rest of it was trying to process what I was seeing. I put my hazards on. I don't remember deciding to do that. I just looked down and they were on. The figure didn't move as I got closer, just stood there on the outside of the rail, leaning into the air above the highway, cars passing underneath without slowing because most of them couldn't see the top of the railing from road level. I could see it because I'd crested the rise at the right angle. I was maybe 10 seconds away from passing directly beneath the overpass when the person let go. I need to stop here for a second because I want to be accurate about what I saw and what I didn't see, and the two things are different. What I saw was the figure release the railing and drop forward. What I registered in the next 2 seconds, the sounds, the movement in my peripheral vision as I came under the overpass and out the other side, I am not going to describe in detail. What I will tell you is that the car in front of me, a silver sedan that had been about 4 car lengths ahead, went sideways. Just completely sideways across 2 lanes in a single violent movement, and then there was the sound of it, and then there was the sound of the car behind me, and then I was on the shoulder with my hands locked on the wheel and the hazards still blinking and the song still playing. The instrumentation had come back in. The slow build was at its peak. I turned it off. I called 911 and my hands were steady in a way that frightened me more than shaking would have. The dispatcher asked me to describe my location and I did. She asked if I was injured and I said no. She asked if I had witnessed the incident and I said yes, and she asked me to stay on the line and stay where I was, and I did both of those things and watched the cars on the highway slow and stop in the way highway traffic slows and stops when something has happened ahead. That particular accordion compression that from a distance looks almost peaceful. There were 4 vehicles involved. The silver sedan, the car that had been behind me, and 2 others I hadn't tracked in the moments before I got onto the shoulder. I found that out later. At the time I just sat on the shoulder and watched the emergency lights appear in my mirrors and told myself to keep breathing at a normal rate. A state trooper took my statement at the side of the road. I told him what I'd seen from the rise, the figure on the outside of the railing, the release, the drop. He wrote things down and didn't react visibly to any of it, and I understood that he had done this before, that this was not a new shape for him the way it was a new shape for me. He asked if I could estimate how long the person had been standing on the railing before the fall, and I said I didn't know, that I'd only seen them for maybe 15 seconds before it happened. He nodded and wrote that down too. He asked if I was okay to drive, and I said I wasn't sure, and he said I could sit where I was for as long as I needed to. I sat there for 40 minutes. I want to be honest about what those 40 minutes were like, because I think people sometimes describe shock as a blank, as an absence, and that wasn't my experience. My experience was the opposite. Everything was extremely present. The texture of the steering wheel, the temperature of the air coming through the slightly open window, the sound of the highway resuming on the other side of the incident, the way traffic just starts again, the way the world doesn't pause to acknowledge that something permanent has just happened inside it. I thought about the song. I thought about the slow build and the drop and the timing of it, and I told myself that was a coincidence and not a metaphor, and I still have to tell myself that sometimes. I drove home eventually. I ate something I don't remember. I didn't sleep until sometime the following afternoon. The thing about witnessing something like that, and I say this 3 years out, having talked to a therapist about it more times than I can count, is that it doesn't process the way other difficult experiences process. It doesn't get filed. It stays in a particular part of your memory that isn't quite the same as the rest of your memory. More like a room in your house where the light is different, where you don't go unless something pulls you there, but you always know the room is there and you always know what's in it. I still drive I-71. I don't take alternate routes or avoid that stretch. The overpass looks exactly like every other overpass on that highway from road level, which is its own particular kind of strange. That a place where something that large happened can look so completely ordinary from the right angle. From the rise, approaching it in the right light, at the right time of evening, I sometimes think about the angle I was at when I saw the figure on the railing. How if I'd been 30 seconds behind where I would have been under the overpass when it happened and never seen it at all. How if I'd been 30 seconds ahead, I would have been past it before it happened and never known. 30 seconds in either direction and my life looks completely different. I don't know what to do with that either. I just know that I turned the music off that evening and I haven't made a playlist since, and some things are too small to explain to another person and too heavy to put down, and you just carry them at a particular weight and learn to walk normally and hope nobody notices you're compensating. The silver sedan driver survived. I found that out 6 weeks later through a news follow-up I probably shouldn't have searched for but did. 2 others were treated and released. 1 was hospitalized for an extended period. The article didn't say how long. I didn't search further than that. There are things you look for because you need to know and things you don't look for because you already know that knowing won't help, and after a while you get better at telling the difference. I got better at telling the difference. I stopped at the first rest stop outside of Amarillo at 11:48 at night because I've been driving since noon and my eyes were doing that thing where the lane markings start to blur at the edges and you know you're 20 minutes away from a mistake. It was a solo trip. I want to be clear about that up front because people always ask, always want to know why I was driving alone at night through rural Texas, and the answer is boring. I was relocating, my lease had ended, my car was packed with everything I owned that mattered, and I had a job starting in 3 weeks in San Antonio that I couldn't be late for. I'd done solo long drives before. I wasn't nervous about it. I was practical about it the way you're practical about things you've done enough times that the risk feels managed. The rest stop was small. 2 bathroom buildings, a covered picnic area, a row of vending machines with that particular fluorescent buzz that sounds louder at midnight than it has any right to. There were 2 other vehicles, a semi parked in the truck lane with its curtains drawn, and a minivan near the far end with a family clearly asleep inside. Hazards off, completely still. I used the bathroom, bought a coffee from the vending machine, sat at one of the picnic tables for about 10 minutes to let my eyes rest, and then got back in my car and kept driving. The second rest stop was 74 miles further south. I pulled in at around 12:50, mostly to use the bathroom again because the vending machine coffee had done what vending machine coffee does. This one was slightly larger. Same basic layout, bathroom buildings, picnic area, vending, a few more parking spots. There were 3 vehicles this time, including another semi, and a dark green pickup truck parked 2 spots from the entrance. Engine off. No movement inside. I went to the bathroom and came back out and didn't think about the truck except in the vague, cataloging way you notice things in empty parking lots at night. I got in my car and pulled out and continued south. The third rest stop was 61 miles later, just past 1:40 in the morning. I almost didn't stop. I wasn't desperate and the coffee had kept me alert enough, but I'd read somewhere that on long solo night drives you should stop every hour regardless of how you feel, just to reset, just to get out of the car and stand on solid ground for a few minutes. So I pulled in, parked near the bathrooms, got out and stretched and stood in the warm Texas night air listening to the crickets and the distant highway hum. And then I saw the dark green pickup, parked at the far end of the lot. Engine off. Same truck. I was certain of it before I was ready to be certain of it, that particular green, the shape of the cab, a small dent on the rear panel above the wheel well that I hadn't consciously registered at the second stop, but that my memory produced now with uncomfortable clarity. I stood very still next to my car and looked at it, and it looked back at me the way an empty vehicle looks back at you, which is blankly, which is worse than if there'd been someone visibly inside. I couldn't see the driver. The cab was dark. I got back in my car and left faster than I'd arrived. Here is what I want you to understand about what was happening inside my head at this point, because I think it matters. I was not panicking. I was doing the thing that women who travel alone learn to do, which is run the calculation quietly and quickly and without drama. The calculation goes like this: what are the odds this is coincidence, and what is the cost if it isn't? 2 rest stops is coincidence. People drive I-27 south. People stop at rest stops. Rest stops are spaced along highways at intervals specifically because drivers need them at regular intervals, so of course some of the same vehicles will appear at more than one. That's logic. That's real. But logic doesn't turn the calculation off. It just runs alongside it. I drove without stopping for the next 90 miles. I pushed the speed to 80 and stayed in the left lane and watched my mirrors with a consistency that started to feel like its own kind of exhaustion. No green pickup. Nothing following close. The highway was sparse but not empty, enough other vehicles that I wasn't alone out there. And I held on to that the way you hold on to things that aren't quite enough but are what you have. I stopped at a 24-hour diner outside of Lubbock at 3 a.m. because I needed real food and real light and a room full of people, even if the room was a mostly empty diner with a tired waitress and 2 truckers at the counter. I sat facing the window with a view of the parking lot and ate eggs and toast and drank real coffee and watched the lot and told myself it was over, that I'd been spooked by a green truck that happened to be heading south on the same highway I was heading south on and had stopped at the same rest stops because that is what vehicles on a highway do. The green pickup pulled into the diner parking lot at 3:24 a.m. I know the time because I looked at my phone the moment I saw it, the same instinct that made me clock mile marker 9 on a different kind of bad night. Your brain starts timestamping when it knows something is being recorded for later. Parked at the far end of the lot, away from the other vehicles, away from the light. The engine went off and nothing happened. No one got out. It just sat there. Dark cab, that particular green, the dent above the rear wheel well catching a little of the parking lot light from across the lot. I told the waitress. I want to say that clearly because I think it's the thing I did right, maybe the only thing I did exactly right that night. I didn't second-guess it or apologize for it or frame it as probably nothing. I told her there was a vehicle that had followed me from 3 rest stops to her diner, and I pointed it out through the window and I asked if there was somewhere I could wait that wasn't visible from the parking lot, and she didn't hesitate for a single second. She walked me to a back booth behind the kitchen partition, brought me more coffee, and told one of the truckers at the counter. He went outside. He came back 5 minutes later and said the truck was gone. I sat in that back booth until 5:15 in the morning when the sky started going gray and the highway filled up with early commuter traffic and the world felt populated enough to drive in again. The waitress didn't charge me for the second coffee. The trucker walked me to my car and waited until I'd pulled onto the highway before going back inside. I made it to San Antonio before noon. I sat in my new empty apartment on the floor with my back against the wall and all the lights on and didn't move for about 2 hours. I filed a report when I had enough composure to find the right number to call. I described the truck as well as I could, the color, the approximate model year, the dent. I gave the rest stop locations and the diner location and the timestamps. The officer who took the report was professional and thorough and told me they would look into it, and I believed him, and I also understood, in the way adults understand things they wish they didn't, that a truck that was already gone was a very difficult thing to find. I don't know who was in that truck. I don't know what the intention was, if there was one. I don't know if I was being followed deliberately or if there is some explanation that doesn't require intent, some coincidence so extended and specific that it only looks like a pattern from where I was sitting. What I know is this: 300 miles of Texas highway, 3 rest stops, 1 diner at 3 a.m., same truck, every time, always parked where the light didn't reach, always a dark cab, always still. I bought a dash cam the following week. I mapped every 24-hour diner on every route I drive regularly. I don't stop at rest stops after 10 p.m. anymore. Not alone. Not in the dark. Not for any reason. And I never drive without my phone charged to 100%, sitting on the seat beside me where I can reach it without looking. Because the one thing that Tripp taught me above everything else is that the most important thing a woman alone on a dark highway can do is make sure someone else knows exactly where she is. The truck never appeared again. I don't find that comforting. I just find it quiet. We found the campsite at around 7 in the evening, which was later than we'd wanted but not late enough to worry about. The drive up into the Olympic Peninsula had taken longer than the map suggested. It always does up there, where the roads narrow and curve back on themselves and the trees press in close enough that your headlights start feeling insufficient even before dark. We had 2 kids in the back seat, 8 and 11, both exhausted from the drive, both past the point of asking how much longer and into the quieter territory of just staring out the windows at the darkening tree line. My husband had the campsite confirmation on his phone. We'd booked it 6 weeks earlier, paid the fee, had the reservation number. Everything was organized the way you organize things when you have children and limited vacation days and need the trip to work. The campsite was occupied when we got there. Not in an ambiguous way. There was a tent already set up, a large gray dome tent, expensive looking, staked properly with a rain fly attached. A camp stove on the picnic table, a pot on the stove, what smelled like something already cooking. A lantern hanging from the rope line between 2 trees, casting a warm yellow circle of light over the whole site. And sitting in the 2 camp chairs on either side of the cold fire pit were a man and a woman, both looking at us as we pulled in, both completely still. My husband checked his phone, checked the site number on the post at the entrance. We were in the right place. He got out of the car and I told the kids to stay put and got out too because I wasn't going to let him handle whatever this was alone. The couple stood up as we approached, which should have been a normal thing, a polite thing, and it was, except that they stood up at exactly the same moment, in exactly the same motion, with a synchronicity that was just slightly beyond what you'd expect from 2 people who hadn't coordinated it. Like a thing you'd notice and then decide you were being uncharitable about. The man was tall, somewhere in his 40s, light jacket, clean boots that didn't look like they'd done much trail walking. The woman was about the same age, dark hair pulled back, a fleece vest, the same clean boots. They were both smiling when we reached them. Normal smiles. Friendly. The man said hello and my husband explained we had a reservation for this site and showed him the confirmation on his phone. The man looked at it for a moment and then looked up and said that was strange because they had a reservation too. He showed us his phone. I looked at it. Different reservation number, same site, same date. I don't know how that happens. Double booking, system error, something administrative. But in the moment it didn't read as suspicious. It read as a bureaucratic problem that needed to be solved between 2 sets of reasonable adults in a darkening campground. My husband suggested we go to the ranger station and sort it out. The man said the ranger station closed at 6. He said it pleasantly, matter-of-factly, and he was right. I'd seen the hours on the website. He suggested we share the site for the night, said there was plenty of room, said they had extra food if we needed it. My husband looked at me. I looked at him. The kids were still in the car. We said we'd think about it and went back to the car to talk. And this is where I need you to stay with me, because what I'm about to describe isn't dramatic. There was no single moment that you could point to and say that is the thing, that is where it went wrong. It was quieter than that. It was a series of things, each one small, that added up to something I still don't have a clean word for. The first thing was what my daughter said when we got back to the car. She was 8. She'd been watching through the window the whole time we were talking to the couple. When I got in, she was sitting very still and she said quietly, without the kind of drama kids usually perform when they're trying to tell you something is scary. She said the lady waved at her and she waved back, and then the lady's smile didn't change but her eyes went somewhere else. She said it like she was describing a math problem. Just information. I asked what she meant by somewhere else and she thought about it and said it was like when you pause a video. The smile kept going but the rest of her face stopped. I told her it was fine. I told her the way you tell kids things are fine when you haven't finished deciding if they are. My husband and I talked for about 4 minutes. The rational argument was straightforward. It was getting dark. The nearest alternative campsite was 40 minutes back down the mountain. The kids were tired. The couple seemed normal. The booking mix-up was explainable. We decided to stay. We got out of the car. The second thing was the food. The woman had taken the pot off the camp stove and was serving 2 bowls when we walked back over. She looked up and said she'd made enough for everyone if we were hungry. My husband said thank you and asked what it was, and she said stew and smiled. I asked what kind and she said the kind with vegetables and smiled again. Same smile both times. Identical. Not in the way people repeat an expression naturally, but in the way a copy repeats an original, just slightly too exact. We said we weren't hungry and started setting up our tent. The third thing took about an hour to notice. We set up the tent, got the kids settled with their sleeping bags, started a small fire. The couple sat in their chairs on the other side of the pit and talked to us in the normal way people talk at a shared campsite. Where we were from, how long we'd driven, had we been to the peninsula before. Normal questions. We answered them. My husband asked them the same questions back. They answered everything correctly. That's the only way I know how to say it. The answers were correct. They were from Portland. They'd driven up that afternoon. They'd camped here before. All plausible. All delivered in a normal, conversational tone. But somewhere in the third or fourth exchange, I noticed that neither of them had asked a question that required knowing anything about us specifically. Every question they asked was the kind of question you ask someone you're meeting for the first time. Except the man asked my husband how the drive had been through the pass, and my husband said it was fine, clear roads, and the man nodded and said yes, it was much better than the last time we'd come through, when the fog had been so bad we'd had to stop twice. My husband nodded slowly and said right, yeah, and I watched his face go very carefully neutral. We had never been through that pass before. This was our first time on the Olympic Peninsula. We had told them that 20 minutes earlier when they asked if we'd been before. I reached over and put my hand on my husband's arm. We lasted another 40 minutes at that fire. I spent most of it watching the couple with the specific attention you give something when your instincts have overruled your logic and you're trying to catch up. The synchronicity kept appearing in small ways. They reached for their coffee cups at the same moment. They turned to look at the tree line at the same moment. Once they both went quiet mid-sentence at exactly the same time. A silence that lasted about 4 seconds before resuming as if it hadn't happened. My daughter fell asleep in my lap. My son was quiet in a way that wasn't his normal quiet. I told my husband I wasn't feeling well. We made our excuses and got the kids into the tent. We left at 4:17 in the morning. I know because I'd been awake since 2, lying in the sleeping bag listening to the complete silence outside the tent. No camp stove sounds, no movement, no voices. Just the trees and the dark. My husband was awake too. We didn't discuss it. We just started quietly packing, and when we had everything we could carry without making noise, we loaded the car, and I buckled the kids in their seats half asleep, and we drove back down the mountain in the dark. The couple's lantern was still on when we pulled out. Yellow light, warm circle, same as when we'd arrived. Neither of them was visible. We didn't go back to get the stakes we'd left in the ground. My son asked about them 3 days later when we were unpacking at home. I told him we'd forgotten them. He accepted that. Kids accept a lot of things when the adults around them are working hard to seem calm. What I've never been able to shake, the thing that sits in the back of everything when I think about that night, isn't the synchronized movements or the smile that paused wrong or even the comment about the pass we'd never driven before. It's the stew. She had 2 bowls ready before we'd agreed to stay. Before we'd even gone back to the car to decide. She was already portioning it out, 2 extra bowls, the right amount for 2 adults, set on the table next to the camp stove like she'd known exactly how many people were coming to that site that evening. We hadn't told her we had children. The bowls on the table were sized for adults. There were exactly 2 of them. I took her route on purpose. That was the decision I'd made 3 weeks before the drive. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while I stared at nothing in particular. 1 year. It had been exactly 1 year since the accident, and I wanted to drive the road she had driven that morning. The coastal highway up through Maine that she had taken every October for as long as I'd known her. The one she'd described to me so many times that I could picture it without ever having been on it myself. The way the fog sits on the water in the early morning. The way the road curves close to the cliff edge in certain places, and you can see the Atlantic just dropping away beneath you on the left side. She loved that drive. She talked about it the way people talk about places that belong to them in some private way. I thought driving it would do something useful. Close something, maybe, or open something. I didn't have precise language for what I was looking for. I just knew I needed to be on that road on that day, and the knowing was solid enough that I didn't question it. I left before dawn and hit the coastal stretch just as the sky was starting to go gray at the edges, that particular early morning light that isn't quite dark and isn't quite day, where everything has a flatness to it, a two-dimensional quality, like the world is still loading. The fog was there exactly the way she had described it. Low over the water, thick in the dips where the road curved down towards sea level, thinning out on the rises. I drove slowly, not because the road required it, but because I wasn't ready to be anywhere else yet. I had the window down despite the cold. I wanted to smell the salt air. She had always come home from this drive smelling like salt and cold and something green that I assumed was the pine trees that lined the inland side of the road. I used to make her describe the drive in detail while I cooked dinner on the nights she came back from it. It was one of our rituals. One of the small private ones that you don't know are load-bearing until they're gone and you feel the structure shift. I was about 40 minutes into the coastal stretch when I saw the figure on the shoulder. I want to be precise about my state of mind at this moment because I think it matters and because I've been asked about it enough times that I've learned to lead with it. I was sad, but I was not impaired. I had not been drinking. I had slept adequately the night before, not well but adequately. I was present and functional and aware of my surroundings with the particular heightened awareness that grief sometimes produces, that state where everything is too sharp and too clear and too real rather than blurred. I was not hallucinating. I was not dissociating. I was just driving. The figure was standing on the right shoulder about 200 yards ahead, facing away from the road, toward the water. The fog was thicker at that point, sitting low over the cliff edge, and the figure was partially obscured by it from the waist down so that it appeared to be standing in the fog rather than on the ground. Light clothing, dark hair, the particular way of standing that is so specific to a person, the weight distribution, the angle of the shoulders, the way the head sits. Those things are as individual as a face, and I knew them the way I knew my own handwriting. I took my foot off the gas. The rational part of my brain was already constructing explanations, and I want to give those explanations their due because they deserve it. A woman of similar build and coloring. A trick of the fog and the early morning light and a year of accumulated grief working on a mind that was already primed, already raw, already looking. The human brain is a pattern recognition machine, and it will find the pattern it is desperate for in the most inadequate raw material. I know this. I knew it then. I slowed to about 15 miles an hour. The figure didn't move. Stood facing the water, the fog moving around the lower half of the body in slow shifting shapes. I was close enough now that I could see the hair moving slightly in the coastal wind. Dark hair, shoulder length, moving the way her hair moved because of its weight and the way she'd always worn it. And then I need you to understand something before I tell you the next part. I was not going to stop. That had been my decision the moment I took my foot off the gas. I would slow down, I would look, I would let myself have whatever this moment was, and then I would keep driving. I had been very deliberate about that. I was not going to stop. I stopped. I don't remember making the decision. I remember the car being in motion, and then I remember it being still, pulled half onto the shoulder about 30 feet behind the figure, engine running, both hands on the wheel. The hazard lights came on. I don't remember turning them on. They were just on. The figure had not moved. I sat in the car for what felt like a long time and was probably 90 seconds. The fog shifted and closed and shifted again. The Atlantic was audible below the cliff, that low constant sound that isn't quite white noise, that has too much variation in it, too much intention. I watched the figure, and the figure stood at the shoulder's edge and faced the water, and the wind moved the dark hair, and I sat in my car with my hands on the wheel and breathed. Then the figure turned around. Not slowly, not dramatically, just turned the way you turn when you've been looking at something and decide you've looked long enough, a natural completed movement. And I saw the face. I am not going to tell you what I saw. I've told this story 4 times to 4 different people, and each time I've gotten to this point I've stopped, and I will keep stopping here because what I saw is mine, and I'm not ready to make it a story that belongs to other people yet, and I may never be. What I will tell you is that I sat in that car for a long time after the figure was gone. Gone meaning I looked away for a moment at the dashboard at my own hands, and when I looked back the shoulder was empty and the fog was just fog and there was nothing there. I got out of the car. I walked to the spot where the figure had been standing and stood there myself and looked at the water. The Atlantic in October from a Maine cliff edge is not a comforting thing. It's enormous and gray and indifferent in the specific way that very old things are indifferent. But I stood there for a while and looked at it and let the wind hit my face and smelled the salt and the cold and something green from the pines behind me. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough that my hands went cold. Long enough that the sky finished deciding to be morning and the flat gray light became something with more depth to it, more dimension. I drove the rest of the route. I stopped at a diner about 20 miles north and drank coffee and ate something I don't remember and sat in a window booth and watched the fog burn off the water in slow patches. I called my brother and talked about nothing for 20 minutes. I drove home in the afternoon with the window still down and the salt smell following me inland until it didn't anymore. I've been asked if I went back. I went back the following October. And the one after that. I've driven that coastal stretch every year since, always in the early morning, always with the window down. I stop at the spot every time. I stand there and look at the water for as long as it takes. The shoulder is always empty. Whatever I saw that first morning, whether it was grief doing what grief does to an exhausted mind on a loaded day, or whether it was something I don't have a framework for and may never have, it hasn't appeared again. But I keep going back. Because the alternative is believing it was nothing, and some part of me, the part that stood at that cliff edge with cold hands and looked at the Atlantic and felt something shift in the architecture of the previous year, that part is not willing to call it nothing. It was the way she stood. Nobody else stands like that. That is all 7. These were real accounts submitted by real people from roads that still exist, from nights that didn't end cleanly. If something has followed you on a dark highway, if you've stopped somewhere you couldn't find again on any map, if you've seen something on a road that you've never been able to explain to another person, drop it in the comments below. We read every single one. This is Bleak Fears. Drive safe getting home tonight.